Hello and welcome guys to another video, and today we have another hot lap and track guide. Recently I was signed by Premier Racing as they are going to now be building setups for the road series on iRacing as well as the oval series that they already have. So there's going to be a lot of track guides coming up. Some of these are going to be driven by myself with setups that I've built, and others are going to be driven by other drivers who have built setups, and I'm just making the track guide. Some of these drivers you're already going to know, like Luciano, Witvoet, Ryan Woodrow, Alexander Paulick, Conrad Kula, and also Keith Hemsoth. We're all building the setups, we're driving them, and we're doing the hot laps as well. So if you'd like to see some more track guides and hot laps, guys, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the videos when they get posted. But let's jump straight into the first one. And today we've got the Mexico GP circuit with the LMP2. And first of all, we're going to have a look at the hot lap driven by myself. And then we're going to have a look at the track guide after that. Let's start with the track guide. So first of all, we're looking at the final corner to start our qualifying lap. With the LMP2s, you usually need 2 warm-up laps. So in an iRacing qualifying session, when you've only got an out lap and 2 flying laps, it'll usually only be that second flying lap that will actually be quick. So the first 2 laps you want to use to warm up the tyres. Now when you want to approach a fast lap, you actually have to start in the final corner. And the LMP2 cars are at their best with the least amount of steering input. That's when they perform really well, is on the high speed corners where you're not giving them much steering input. And also with the TC and the TC slip, we'll always want to engage when you've got some steering angle input. So for the last corner, we want to open it up as much as possible. So here, I clip that apex, and then what I'm wanting to do is basically let the car run out to almost all the way to the wall and just open up that steering wheel. See, we've already almost completely opened up the steering wheel, and I'm basically driving towards this blue wall and to the end of this curb. And I'm just trying to let the car rev out as much as possible and just open up that last corner as much as possible to get the highest speed possible when you go to start this lap, because there's such a long main straight here that you want to get the best exit possible out that last corner. So going into the first corner, I'm looking for the number 5 and the number 4 board, and I'm braking about halfway between the two. I'm then trying to get down to second gear as quickly as possible, and I'm trailing the brakes and keeping it onto the left side of the track all the way until just after that number 2 board on the left. After I pass that, I start bringing it in to the apex. Now, this yellow sausage curb, there's a lot of them over the track. These are quite high, so you only want to clip them when you're either going straight over them and your wheel is straight, or you're going really slow. Most of the corners you have to try and avoid them. And with this first corner, we're trying to open up turn 2 and 3. So I actually want a late apex here. and I want to drop it into first gear just before I hit the apex. And as you see, I'm apexing really late on the first corner because I want to be almost to the middle of the track going into turn 2, but slightly more to the right just to open it up. And you only need just 20% braking to turn it into the left-hander here. There isn't much of a braking marker, but if you look on the left, you will see this red and white curbing start, and that's about where you want to tap those brakes. But because of the column, you can't really see it, but that's where I usually aim to brake. So about 20% braking, keeping it in first gear, and I use all the curb on the left here, including this yellow sausage curb, to try and straight line turn 3 as much as possible. So I've got all 4 wheels basically over this curb. Track limits are fine here. So now once we've used all that curb, we want to try and be in the middle of the track. And for turn 3, we just need to lift the throttle a slight bit. So about 75% throttle as we come over this right-hander. Avoid the sausage curb and just use the red and white curbing. And then try and straighten the wheel as early as possible. The LMP2 tends to want to snap on this corner. So you sometimes just have to be prepared and give it a little bit of counter steering. But if you can straighten up the wheel fast enough, sometimes it won't give you that snap on the exit, but it seems to vary lap to lap. So straightening up that wheel, and on the exit here, there's a ditch. I say ditch, it's like a dip between this curbing and this, I think this is concrete or some sort of tarmac. So you either want to put your left tire on the red and white curbing, or you want to put it onto this concrete stuff. You do not want to put it on this little line, otherwise it will just hook you to the left. So here I go completely over it. You can actually see this dip. So it's very easy for your left tire to get stuck there. So you want to do what I've done here and go completely over it, and that allows you to open up the exit a little bit more. Now going into turn 4, I'm looking for this number 2 board, aiming to brake there, and try and turn in as late as possible, because similar to the first 3 corners, this is kind of a square section of corners. So we want a really late apex. So we're braking all the way into first gear, and I start to turn in at the end of this alternate course here on the right hand side. So just as that starts to end, I begin to turn in into first gear, and you can use a lot of this curb because there's no sausage curb on the inside. And I try and get it to as far over to the left as possible on the exit here. So as you see, I then tap the brakes. Again, there isn't really much of a marker here, but there is the start of the grass on the right here, and just before that disappears out of your view, I tap the brakes, so you can use that as a reference. So I tap, but it's literally just 20%, just to get that weight transfer over onto the right hand side. Now this curbing here, depending on the angle you hit it, sometimes you can take a little bit of the yellow sausage curb, but if you hit it wrong, it will throw you out wide. So try to avoid it if you can. And then again, just open up the steering wheel as early as possible. This is similar to the exit of turn 3 where it's got that little dip, so you want to use all of the exit here. Track limits are really lenient on this track, I found as well. And now you want to make sure that you're not braking whilst you're on this curb, because it will just lock the tyres. So going into this right-hander, it's a double right-hander, and you want to keep it really nice and tight. Again, there's no braking marker, so you kind of just have to do this corner by feel. This is where I start to brake, and unfortunately there isn't really any braking marker you can use. You kind of just have to get the feel for it. Now I'm only braking up to about 40%, and then I'm just trailing about 20% just to keep it really tight on this double right-hander. And then as soon as I know, okay, the fronts are gripped, then I want to start applying the power. So I apply the power almost just after the first apex. I start to put on a little bit of power, and then as soon as I know, okay, the rears and the fronts, there's grip, I can start to accelerate, and then just unwind the steering wheel. I use a little bit of this curbing. Depending on the line you take, you can use a bit more, but again, there's that little dip there where the drain is, so you just got to be careful that you either use all of it or just this bit. Don't use that area. So now going into the S's, this is probably the most difficult section of the track, especially in these high downforce cars. So going into this left-hander, again, there's no braking boards, but there's this canopy garage thing on the right hand side, and I brake about a car length before that. So here, this is where I'm starting to brake, and as you see, it's just started to go off my monitor. So I start to brake here, dropping it down into third gear initially, and about 50% brake force, and then drop it into second gear, and then I'm just letting the car coast to the apex. Because the diff is quite low on this setup, it will actually rotate off power, so you don't need to be on the brake or the throttle. You can be just off them completely and let it rotate. Soon as I've got that apex, I'm then getting onto the power, and I'm trying to actually almost cut completely this right-hander. So as you see, I'm opening up the exit of that left-hander, and I'm actually aiming for this patch of concrete on the inside of this curb. So as you see, shift up into third gear, and I'm basically trying to get my left tyre on that red and white curbing. So as you see here, I can almost hook the car round this right-hander because it drops into that little dip, and then I'm hooking it round this right-hander. And then when this grandstand thing is basically in line with the middle of the car, then I'm starting to aim for this left-hander. Now you can hook the front left on that little dip off the edge of the curbing, but it can snap, so sometimes it's best just to drive just on the red and white curbing and not go over it completely. So as you see, I'm now turning into the left-hander, only just lifting off the power. You don't need to tap the brakes, I'm just lifting to about 50%. Just trailing on back onto the power. I want to keep it as left as possible, so I'm trying to get a really late apex here and just managing the power. Then I get up to 100% power, and I've got it pointed at the left here. Now there's this edge of this barrier here, that orange marker, and I'm braking for this right-hander just after that marker. So just after that marker's disappeared, I'm on the brakes. You don't need to brake much, about 40%, but get down into second gear for that rotation. And again, you're aiming to hook as much of this right-hander as possible. I'm turning in for this just before the end of this barrier. See how these two barriers are different? Just before the end of that barrier, I turn in, trailing the brakes, and then as soon as I've got the front gripped up, then I'm getting on the power. And you don't need to keep it too far right because the exit of this left-hander is really wide. The track opens up a lot. So you don't need to keep it too far over to the right. Just before this curb ends, I'm straightening up the wheel and I'm aiming to hit this apex here. It gets a little bit of a slide, which helps you open up the left-hander. As you see there, the rear might slide just a little bit, and that helps you open up this left-hander. Again, you can hook this, but it does tend to make the car more unstable, so I tend to just put the wheel just about halfway onto that curbing. And then you've got all this runoff, so you can open up that exit a lot more. Now going into the last sector, this is the most technical part of the track. It's a lot of high curbs and you can't see them because of this thing. So going into this right-hander, I'm braking just as this red and white curbing starts. I'm braking down into second gear and trying to just carry as much speed as possible and trail the brakes into the corner. So as you see, I'm aiming to hit this apex here, trailing into second gear, and I'm aiming to just clip this red and white curbing and avoid the yellow curbing, and then end up on this exit curb. So as you see here, hook that red and white curbing, and then I want to let the car go out all the way up to that red and white curbing. So be very careful on this curb though, because if you go too far over, it will just beach the car. This curb is really high. So you want to go run up right to the edge of it. You can see how there's this little line. You don't want to go higher than that. If you go higher than that, then the car will beach. So I'm letting it run out wide to this left curb, and then I want to bring it over to the right to open up this upcoming hairpin. So I bring it all the way over to the right, and then I'm looking for the start of this sausage curb to brake. So just before I get to that curbing, I'm braking, and I want to go all the way down into first gear and let the car go really wide here because it's a super late apex. It's very easy to lock up though, so that's why I'm only braking to about 40-50%. Now, we've got that really late turn in, but we can't actually see the apex. So this corner takes a lot of practice to get a feel for where the apex is because you can't see it. And now, I'm just clipping a little bit of this red and white curbing. As you see here, you want to avoid this dip and this sausage curb. So I'm just using a little bit just to help me hook round the corner. And I want to bring it over to the left here because we've got this right-hander coming up. So I want to open up that right-hander and the last corner as much as possible. And now I start to straighten up my wheel. And I basically start turning into the right-hander just as this curb is about to disappear behind my car. Then I turn in for the right-hander. Again, this is really high curbing, so we want to use this to hook us around the corner, but we want to be careful that we don't get that front right stuck in this dip here. So I use a little bit of it to hook me around, and then I want to straighten the wheel as early as possible for this little straight, but I keep it in first gear. So straighten the wheel as early as possible, and then use this curbing to open up the final corner. But again, don't go any higher than that line. If you go higher than that line, you'll either lock the brakes or you'll beach the car. So don't go higher than that line. As you see, my left hand side of my tire is on that line. If you go over it, then you just beach the car. So going into the final corner, there isn't a braking board, but there's this building here on the left. Just as that ends, is usually a good braking marker. I brake just before the curb ends. That's where I've got a feel for, but if you need a marker, you can use that. That's about where I brake. So just as that disappears, I'm on the brakes. You don't need much. You just need enough to get the nose turned in. So as you see, I'm only braking to about 48%, and then I'm just trailing those brakes. And unlike how we opened up the corner to start the lap, we want this to be really nice and tight. But I want to get on the power nice and early, but you have to be careful with the TC slip. So you want to get on the power, but gently, and open up the steering wheel as you're getting on the power. So I get on the power here, just use a little bit of this curbing. You don't want to unsettle the car. Then I'm getting on the power, unwinding the steering wheel, and you want to bring it over to the right here, but don't try and be too tight because this corner has a little bit of banking, but it's also really wide. So you want to use some of that to build up the speed, because if you go too wide, you're making the track longer, which is going to make you slower. But if you go too tight, then even though the track is shorter, you can't build up the same speed. So you want to kind of get this middle ground, that corner, to allow you to straighten up that wheel and get the power on without the TC engaging. And then once you've got that power on, then you can bring it tight again for the final corner and make some pressure. So there's the track guide for the first week of the IMSA series, and this will be the open series. If there's any suggestions for the next track guides, please do let me know, guys, because this will be our first round of setups, hot laps and track guides. So any suggestions, do please let me know in the comments. But as always, guys, thank you very much for watching, and see you again next time.